So in my time off, I've had a lot of thought and thoughtfulness about my past relationships and where I've gone wrong in them and where they began to break down, and whether or not it was because of me, um, the woman, or the culture at large. All of these things being inextricably linked to each other. The fashions and the trends of the day, the art, and the objects that really have a day-to-day impact. If we're going to get even more complicated, having to deal with status, social status, association, or socioeconomic status, rather, to be specific, and how the interpretations and the I don't want to get too abstract here, um, because the way I look at these things is historically. I've always had an interest in history from a very young age, and watching the trends and the um, the movements, and uh, just a great interest. Fascinating stuff. And so, what I say is not necessarily directed at any one person. And if I appear threatening, I'm sorry. That's not my intent. I have no hate in my bones. I'm not interested in conflicts or any kind of, you know, uh, antagonism, because it doesn't do anything. The pen is mightier than the sword. And as much as I have interest in dangerous things, in order to, you know, pursue life the way that I wish to pursue, I'm not going to impose my views and my opinions based upon other people's experiences and works academically, um, to force them around to my position of view and stance. I have, again, I've seen and been around so many people at different life experiences that the culmination, and that I speak through with my voice here, is as best as I can be. So, for the record, I don't have a problem with queer people, or this rainbow spectrum, full spectrum warrior um, community. If it's not up to me as a good man and as a good Christian to judge these people, because like many things, there's a limit to my compassion and to my self efficacy, and my self worth. So if I don't speak up about these things and get my point across, to whomever is listening, again, I'm not directing this at any one particular person at all. It's not intended to trigger. These videos that I do are not intended to trigger any one person. And if I use someone, uh, use a woman as an example of what goes wrong, and how things can go wrong, in order to help other people um see the roots of the rot, because root to fruit, it all starts with a base ideology and an idea, and religion. And if I'm going to extrapolate that further, in the absence of religion or a central belief system, a core identity, that is rooted in historical context, and a larger a community that is a country or a city or a province, any kind of definition that makes us a tribe, either through genealogy or historical context. And the means by which the exploitation happens, as I've said in other videos, is the cutting down of these central tenets and these traditions to try to reestablish a new order of things. And I'm not going to say a new world order thing because, well, I'm not necessarily a conspiracy theorist, but I do like entertaining ideas like that because you got to see things from all angles in order to get to the bottom of the truth within in the discourse that is gaining knowledge. Because get alfalfa going on here. You know, a little bit of a horn. It's funny. Yeah. Boy. And here I am talking to myself in a phone because, a lot of people assume that my social isolation is involuntary, but this couldn't be any further from the truth. Because I've said in other videos, the worst thing that an intellectual or an intelligent person can do is expose themselves to the public. You'll get assaulted from all angles, and your character will be defamed and degraded, and you will suffer the consequences that you never thought were possible. There's unintended consequences to all of these social movements. And where does the funding come from? Que bueno. That's one of the key things that I learned from reading Adbusters is you got to follow the money and see the root of it, to see where it originates. Because it's all usually power structures are all about control of resources, and then people, right? By manipulation tactics. And culture is a resource, and it's been monetized uh, in this current day. If not, I'm gonna just looking back at this and watching the internet turn from a wonderful thing, as a point as something that was a brand new and wonderful thing to connect people into a larger human community, into this monster that we keep feeding, and that plays into narcissism and psychopathy and other mental conditions, for which are then exacerbated by profiteers and exploitation. Because then even our very bodies themselves become products. And again, I'm going to reiterate, I don't have a problem with queer people. I don't. It's not up to me to judge. And if I did, I would have never shared a house with a gay man. Go and ask him, if you want to find out. His name is Clayton Humans. He was a friend. I met him through mountain bikes in Peterborough while I was at Trent. And Trent is known for being highly accepting of gay people and gender queer, or whatever you want to call yourself at this stage of the game. Because my opinion is still with the DSM-4 or older versions, where these are dissociative disorders and are conditions of propaganda and brainwashing. Uh, and when confronted with this, just like a soldier, it induces PTSD, because no one wants to believe that they've been taken by propaganda. No one wants to think that they've been betrayed by something that they believed in wholeheartedly. And as I sit here on my soapbox, my princess in the pea bed, um, I'm gonna get straight to the point. And I got 3 texts here to support what I have to say. And so what I have is body dressing, and the interesting narrative of the life of Ola de Quino. Or Gustav Vasa, the African, written. So this is from my African history course at Trent. This is from my human sexuality course at Fanshawe, and this is from my Russian history course at Trent when I was doing it. So the reason why I put these three together is to illustrate a point that the means by which we are exploited now is completely different than it was in the past. And communism is not an idealism or political ideology that you want to get behind, because it's just the same as an authoritarian dictatorship. And what happens in those, as is the pattern of history, as what happens is there's an assault upon demoralization, an assault upon the character of people within a country by tearing down um, symbols and symbolism and religion and anything that is a unifying force that is uh, in opposition to the state. And if you're gonna go back, say if I'm gonna correlate that to something else in history, it's the church versus the crown in medieval times. Where there's been this power struggle between the Catholic Church and say the English crown, which led to what was it, Henry VIII, and establishing the Anglican Church because he wanted to get a divorce, and the Catholic Church wouldn't allow him to do that. A Protestant. That's it. One of the two. Feel free to correct me. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to lead off with this, right? The body dressing and fashioning the queer self. So I'm gonna do the preamble here, and then I'll go to the conclusion, so that you get the gist of it, and that I get to what I'm really thinking and feeling about this at this moment. Okay, so this is written by Ruth Holiday. And okay, I'm gonna skip ahead to this part, which first she's explaining how she went about these video interviews, and giving it context. And then, okay, so I'm going straight to fashioning the self. A huge volume of literature is developing on consumption and its meaning, especially focused around fashion and dress. Academic writings on fashion have frequently emphasized the communicative meaning of the consumption and display of fashion and dress. However, Colin Campbell is especially critical of certain postmodern writers who attribute too much importance to the symbolic meaning of product and clothes and too little on the meaning of actions. He shows the way in which postmodern writers who stress the playfulness of identity, the ways in which identities might be taken up and thrown off at will. Excuse me, I let a dog out of the room here. He shows the way in which postmodern writers who stress the playfulness of identity, the ways in which identities might be taken up and thrown off at will, inevitably position consumption and display at the set of rational, unconstrained choices. While there is some validity in the argument, he proceeds to adopt an opposite polemic. Bipolar polemic. That's my interpretation. I'll probably look that up, meaning up later, whatever. Where individuals or consumers function at almost unconsciously within a constrained set of choices, based on previous shopping experiences based on previous shopping experiences. However, it is homogenizing and feminizing assumptions about individuals involved in consuming fashion that are most troubling. A woman holds up a dress and says, "This won't suit me. I am too small. It would look good on a taller woman." Or another will say, "Round necklines don't suit me." Or, "I can't wear yellow. It doesn't suit my complexion." So I'll complete this. Using the framework effectively erases the social, rendering fashion a question of individual taste or personal identity, and leaving little room for discussion of the visible manifestation of social identities via dress. Even in Campbell's example, it is clear that the discourse's style is at work, a discourse at which dictates what garment colors go with which complexion, and at what age one must stop wearing V-necks and start wearing round neck clothes. Furthermore, in my research, it is clear that fashion's communicative role in the production of identities is an important one and must not be overlooked, especially in the context of queer identities. Having been invisible or pathologized for so long in writing, the media, law, and culture more generally, as well as being literally invisible on the bodies of subjects, queer identities have been increasingly visible through a number of mechanisms. The politics of visibility, as well as the many everyday cues and codes of dress, gestures, or conduct, are often used to communicate identities to others of the same or different groups. For example, the development of queer styles such as butch and camp, to name but two, have become signifiers of sexuality and are mapped onto the surface of our bodies, not least through clothes. As Rosa Ainley comments, without visual identity, there is no presence, and that means no social support networks and no community. Thus, Campbell's female uh, consumer whose choice lies in whether there is red or blue frock that suits her most is irrelevant to strong social identities, such as those constructed around sexualities. If indeed she is relevant to anyone but Campbell's imaginary shoppers. The issue is echoed in Elizabeth Wilson's 1985 work. If the self, in all of its aspects, appears threatened in modern society, then fashion becomes an important, indeed vital, medium in the recreation of the lost self or decentered subject. For the individual may lay claim to the particular style, may claim to a particular style, maybe more than ever a lifeline, a proof that one does at least exist. So, a lot of this book, if I'm gonna speak of my own opinions here, and not through observation and being close to these communities, and admittedly, I've been to a couple of gay bars myself. Who freaking cares? They were my friends. I got no issues with my self confidence or my sexual identity. I know who I am, and what I love is women. And that's why I'm reading this right now, is to highlight the fact that, well, in this, there's been a cultural, if I'm going to go with this further, there's a cultural context to exploitation, because there's a machine that profits off of the constant questioning of identity. So I go a little bit further with this and speed up it. Okay, so arguably, and again, this is a bit older. It's not exactly current. Where's the publishing date? 2001. So this is about 20 years behind. But it takes about 20 to 15 years for an idea to become part of society, and for it to have an effect. Okay, so arguably until the 1990s, fashion itself may have been provided the most important signifier in the construction of queer identities in the West. Gay men were marked simply by being fashionable against the backdrop of a masculinity, beyond temporary affirmation to specific youth subcultures, largely disinterested in a subject dismissed as the preserve of women. Feminist lesbians, I call them turbo lesbians, the really extreme ones, that believe men are at the center and the patriarchy is at the center of societal problems. You gotta get out of town, honestly. Get out of town. And of course, visibly fought fashion as a constraining and feminizing force of capitalism. And so, as I was saying, right, there's a part of the machine, the consumerist machine that profits off of manipulating women's identity. Okay, force of capitalism and heteropatriarchy. Although fashions have always had a place within femme and lesbian and bisexual cultures, for example, Hemmings 1999, Nestle 1989. However, the 1990 complicated matters, androgyny, fashionable many times in history, but most recently developed by lesbian and bisexual women, have slipped easily into the mainstream of youth culture more generally. So this is what I'm warning about, and this is why I read this and why I'm so personally affected um, by what has happened to women. By a cultural parasite that is influenced and intoxicated by drugs, and also by this drug. Okay, the Communist Manifesto. Um, trying to achieve some utopian idealism of equality and equity, that for which does not exist in anthropo. So if you're going to go by, if I'm going to go by anthropological and biological context, humans are hierarchical in the same way that dogs are. It's implicit to the observation. We're not all created equal. Okay, so anyways, moreover, the media frenzy over lesbian chic, possibly fueled by panic over the erosion of visible differentiation between straight and queer women. This I have an issue with too, right? It's very hard to discern these days who is what and what is whom. And again, that being a means of exploitation because you have no central identity, has inspired to some middle class lesbians and bi women to reclaim fashion and to muscle in on some of the boys' fun organized around the plethora of new clubs and bars. This is to some extent facilitated by a newfound disposable income in the climate of greater opportunities for middle class women. Furthermore, as Silverman explains, postmodern fashion puts quotation marks around the garments it revitalizes, allowing them to be reread in a space of ironic distancing between the wearer and the garment. This opens up a space for playing with fashion, which is the antithesis of being its victim, and thus the feminist arguments about the regulation of women's bodies through fashion decline in importance. Okay, a little bit more, and then I'll go to the conclusion. Okay, so this opens up, in addition, Sean Nixon shows how the recent growth in UK men's pastimes for straight men, thus queer markets for the 1990s, have become more subtle and sophisticated than jean and check shirts advocated for all gay men in the 1970s. For the jeans and checkered shirts. And have moved significantly away from the generic styles addressed onto the specifics of labels such as, for example, Levi's, Adidas, Ted Baker, Versace. This is not to say, though, that these labels in themselves can be taken as reliable evidence of sexuality, only that in specific contexts they can hint at a particular direction. Thus, there are complexities of sexual and other identity performances at the start of the millennium. Now, I've played with my own fashion, and when I was, really trying here in the London community to be an artist, without previous knowledge of other people, and without me telling them, like my mother did fashion design at Humber, and so I understood that the concept of the dandy, right, a well dressed man, and there's room for misinterpretation, But as an artist, if I'm going to go through the tradition of all the great artists, I got to make an art piece of myself. I got to be something. I want to be something to be looked at and something interesting, so that I could even start a discussion, because attractive people have it a lot easier. And even though I'm attractive, I have not had an easy life, and it's easy to assume that attractive people have it easier, but it isn't always the case like that. Okay, so into the conclusion here. Identity may be thought through on a number of levels. Different spaces of performativity afford subject more or less critical distance from the performances of identity in which they engage, using a combination of political and subcultural discourses. However, rejection of hegemonic discourses may be expressed as individuality rather than the social other in which one is implicated. Subjects are likely to be less critical of such technologies in which operate on the scene. All right, so the happening, right, the hipsterism sort of deal. Uh, Subjects are likely to be less critical of such technologies which operate on the scene, reducing ontological contradictions and negative experiences of regulatory regimens to individual faults such as bitchiness. So this the bitchiness is interpreted in a lot of circles as masculinity, right? Or it's a change up of affirmation, being assertive. And so okay, I'm going to stop this one at about a half hour before I move on to the other texts. Traditional political discourses of sex, gender, and sexuality are ill-equipped to explain and examine the micro-power plays which take place in all spheres of the creation of the queer subject. So what? That's a very good passage right there, in saying that when you're queer, when you're weird, it's about power. Because something as I've explained before, subjectivity. Um, no one can examine you because you're like, oh, that's not me. I'm always changing and so forth. I'm fluid like the river, and thus the means of exploitation and manipulation happen. And biologically speaking, women can be extremely manipulative. It's not popular to talk about. It's not cool. It's taboo now to speak of it, but the culture changes. That women are like children. Especially young women, or tell whatever you want to examine me for. Um, Especially young women, which are extremely vulnerable and rather naive. And so and young people especially, and I've said this in another video, Stalin, that principle, give me a child, I'll give you a communist. It's very easy to manipulate young people. They're highly suggestible, and I know this because of my experience of working with children and with teenagers as a cadet instructor. So I don't need to hear anyone's opinion. I know this for a fact, and I know how easy it is to do it too. Because power, when given to the inexperienced and the powerless, becomes a means of revenge. And we don't need revenge in this society. All right. Instead, these discourses set up false binaries which offer the subject little exploratory proficiency in negotiating the everyday technologies of the self. So the tools by which we use to express ourselves. Thus, the subject often resorts to the cultural discourse of essentialism prevalent in queer culture in order to negotiate a position. The fixity of such positions, combined with the unworkability of standard political discourses, often seem to leave the subject disempowered, unable to explain or put into a cogent or cognate political context of the ontological experience which contradicts these discourses. So a bunch of wibbly wobbly, timey wimey bull crap. Subjectivity. It's a means of exploitation in order to gain power and in order to disrupt the power structure at large. In this guise of, oh, hey, we're going to equalize things. We're tired of being treated like this and marginalized. But the choice to live like this is, borne by the weight. And so the weight is borne by the shoulders of the person that chooses it. You can't blame other people for your own choices and what life you choose to live. You can't blame the religion. You can't blame the culture at large, or individuals, or one sex or the other, because it's all a closed contained system, right? There is no one without the other. As is below, so is above, right? There's always going to be influences all the way through the entire hierarchy. Okay, and this gets into old views of psychology, like from Freud. Okay, so I'm skipping a bit here. The concept of narcissism, especially the narcissistic gaze, to introduce a social theory of identity performance. So a lot of this, this opinion has to do with, okay, so gender is performative. Um, Sex and gender. It's very confusing. Why would you want to separate the two of them? Gender roles and then sexuality, when in the reality there isn't a separation between the two. You go by historical context. There's switching of the roles occasionally in which we play, but we are cooperative as a human species. There's no one without the other, and when there's no balance, then everything falls. It's not working.